Good morning, and welcome to the Lightcast studios for this live analysis of the employment situation, also known as the Monthly Jobs Report, a Bureau of Labor Statistics report that gives us some glimpse into the health of our economy. On this January 6, 2023, I'm your host, Christopher Laney, and I am joined by two of our labor economists, Senior Labor Economist Ron Hetrick and Senior Labor Economist Rucha Vankudre. Ron, Rucha, welcome to the studio.
Hi
Good
there.
morning.
Happy New
I
Year.
have to say, it feels like it's been forever since the three of us have been together. And so it is good to see you guys' faces and to get into this analysis. So, Rucha, I'm going to start with you. Your first take on what you're seeing out of this report.
I think the job growth the jobs added were what was expected, right? At about a little over 200,000. I think the shocking thing to me was that the unemployment rate came down to 3.5%. I think everyone had really been predicting that if anything, it would, definitely stay steady, maybe tick up a little bit, and that is just not what we've seen. I think an important thing to note on that is that last month's estimate was actually revised down. So it's not as if this all happened in the month of December. It was actually has been slowly trickling downward the past couple of months.
What do you
But I
think
that
that
is,
means for that, like the health of our economy, like in the sense of unemployment fluctuating, but not to what we actually thought was going to happen?
I think
Is
it
this a
depends
good
whose
thing?
opinion you're asking, right? I mean, the labor market is incredibly strong. It's sort of, I think, surpassing everyone's expectations. We saw labor force participation tick up a little bit too, which is great. But I think from the point of view of, the Fed, who's been waiting for unemployment to go up a little bit, or at least quite a bit, right, to about 4.6%, this is the wrong direction for them. And after last month, where they eased up a little bit on the hikes, right, went down to half a percentage point instead of 3/4 of a percentage point. Um, this almost feels like they're going to maybe have to reverse course again. The minutes that were released showed that they're planning on increasing rates all through 2023. And I just don't see how anything else happens given inflation is going to be so high.
Ron, there's a lot of interesting things in this report. What are some of your key takeaways after you first went through it?
Yeah, some of the most powerful things that I'm seeing here is you finally reverse a several months trend of people kind of dropping out of the labor force. So focusing in on that a little bit more, you saw a significant decline in those people saying, I am out of the labor force. And that number of people who say, I'm out of the labor force, but want a job now. Now, in the past several months, it looks like these people, instead of, saying, I'm going to stay in the labor force, but I'd like a job, they were just completely disappearing. Now they came back in. And what we found is they all got jobs. So you did see this increase in the labor force, but, you do this math equation and you realize just how many jobs that we did create for people, that employed number going up. That's on that household survey side. When you go to the payroll survey side, something very interesting is going on. So you have manufacturers saying that in December, they started to notice orders going down. And we certainly, as the year was going on, we were saying, you can see that we had a really strong purchasing cycle for consumer products that occurred, especially earlier on in 2022. Now, if you look at the data in December, let's focus on retail trade, for example, products that you would buy for your house, furniture or electronics, things like that. We did see weakness in those retail sectors, but in the sectors that you would do for yourself, things like food or healthcare or things of those natures, we actually saw gains in those. So we do see consumer patterns starting to emerge, that they are changing to that more of servicing, the going out to restaurants, also really strong in this report. But getting away from that kind of the material things that we were buying for the home. So I think we are seeing signs of a transitioning economy, but there's still a lot of money out there. And people are saying, I'm going to take that money and spend it on myself rather than maybe goods for my house.
Well, Ron, you mentioned labor force participation going up. Are you seeing that among all demographic groups? Are we seeing, we talk a lot about missing workers. Are we seeing all those missing workers come back, or is it just certain groups that are returning back to work?
Yeah, it's still, I've got to get into the data a little bit more, but what you do see emerging in this report was it seemed to be those people with only a high school diploma that really caught fire. So about 500,000 gain in that particular labor pool. So think about the month we were in. It's December. It's the holidays. You have a lot of holiday industries that are hiring, and they hire a very specific type of person. And we see a lot of these people coming off the sidelines and taking jobs in December. So that sets up a really interesting question. are these people who came in to do these jobs probably for the holidays, are they going to stay on payrolls in January, in February? Or were these people with only these high school diplomas just coming in to work those holiday hours? The pay was really great. I mean, if you hadn't worked the past year and you were working a holiday job, you're probably making $3-4 more an hour. So they did that again this year. So it's just going to be really interesting to see in January. Will those people stay in? You know, I think when we see college degree people coming back in, we tend to believe that those people coming in to stay, you know, they're taking a permanent job. But in that high school only level, those people are more taking a job of, you know, seasonal nature. Certainly not something we would expect to see on a year-round level.
So it'd be interesting to see what the data shows in the next month or two, as individuals are either exiting or maybe they decided they want to stay in the workforce. That's one thing that we can hope for. Ron, you alluded a little bit to the industry-specific data. I want to jump into that a little bit more. Rucha, I'm going to start with you. Was there anything in this report related to specific industries that really stuck out to you?
So as Ron was saying, you know, the places where jobs were added were really leisure and hospitality. They added about 67,000 jobs. Healthcare and social assistance added about 75,000 jobs. And then 27,000 each in about trade, transportation, as well as construction. As Ron was saying, you know, I think it really fits in with this pattern, right? Of those are the workers who are, you know, it makes sense that these are sort of the less college educated workers who are now coming back into these industries. I think another thing that jumped out at me is if you look at where jobs were actually lost, we actually are now seeing that in December. We saw not that many, but about 5,000 jobs lost in information and about 6,000 lost in professional and business services. And I think if you think about sort of the news that's been coming out recently with the layoffs, you know, it's interesting because the November report showed that for the most part, those sectors still were strong. And it looks like, you know, I think overall, even if they're not, quits were still up then and openings were still relatively high. This report is maybe starting to show the softening very specifically sort of in those big tech firms.
Speaking of softening, Ron, one of the indicators I noticed in this report was talking about temporary workers. Yep. Can you shed some light on what happened with temporary workers in this report, and what does that mean for the labor market?
Yeah, this is actually really important for the more savvy people out there who really love to follow labor data over history. You know, we always look at temp help as a kind of a lead. So when you're going into a downturn, we see people sometimes will cut back on contingent labor because there's less of that kind of burst demand. And we did see a pretty significant fall in temp help. Now, if you kind of go back and watch that particular industry, it kind of was growing along with all of the strength that we were seeing in consumer products, specifically things like warehousing, which has been really kind of coming apart in the past several months. You know, Amazon just announced yesterday, I think, more layoffs. We do see this weakness, like I said, on that consumer supply side, and that's where a lot of contingent workers do reside. So I think that this fairly sizable drop that we saw, this 30,000 drop in contingent labor, is probably starting to give us an indication that that particular part of the economy is finally starting to soften. Now, that is an important part of this because as we see consumers just demanding less product, it will take a lot of the pressure off of all of these industries that were competing for that kind of worker away. So I think this is an interesting lead indicator for us that we're going to have to kind of watch going forward. I do think you will probably see manufacturing, warehousing continue to kind of soften up a little bit as we start this year. And I think that one would probably be a pretty interesting flag for that.
So over the past few months, as we've been analyzing these reports, we've been doing it in conjunction with what is the Fed doing or what are they going to do? Rucha, you alluded to this already for a moment. What do you think is going to happen? Is it, you know, the labor market feels like it's full steam ahead. Nothing's happening right now with the labor market. So Rucha, I'll start with you. You know, you kind of mentioned, are we going to have interest rates hiking all the way through 2023? What do you think they're thinking about when they're reading this report today?
I mean, I think yes is my best guess. If you look, I mean, they were planning on doing that before they saw the strength of this report, right? So if anything, this is just going to encourage them to do that. One quick thing I did want to jump off, as Ron was saying, you know, along with the layoffs that were announced by Amazon, the majority of those actually, I believe, are in their HR department, what they call their people experience department. And so I think, you know, another place we really are going to be seeing this and where we tend to see it, right, is people operations. So I think that's going to be another place that's going to be loosening a lot. But in general, it does seem kind of isolated to those fields. So yeah, I don't see what the Fed does other than keep raising rates and praying that something changes.
Yeah, Ron, the narrative that we're kind of seeing is higher interest rates for a longer period of time. What is your thoughts on that? Do you think that's kind of in check with what you're thinking?
I think that what's happening, this is what's been happening over the past several months, is I think we have a lot of people, you see it in the blast headlines, you see things in YouTube videos, you see things on your news feed about people kind of predicting doomsday scenarios and in these kind of steep recessions and everything. And I think what's happening is this kind of fundamental lack of understanding of just what a tight labor market does to an economy. So as you start to see these things and as the Fed maybe gets more frustrated and they're trying to create this weakness, you are dealing with a situation where there are just so many people with so much money. And so if you have money, you spend money, and spending money keeps an economy going. And I think we just came through a period of a lot of pay increases. We have a lot, like I said, we may be switching from goods to services, but those services industries, people still want to be out doing things, just going back to the industry sector, things that Rucha was mentioning, you see people are traveling, you see people are going out to eat. And as long as people continue to do that, consumer spending is the biggest part of what we're looking for in a GDP report. And I think there's just still so much driving that. And I think the Fed's ability to stop people from consuming is really kind of out of their hands. It's really up to people themselves to say, I've bought enough or I have everything that I need. And I think we are seeing some of that correction going on right now. So I think this is just going to be something that's going to be interesting, that the people who do have jobs, seem to be doing very, very well in those jobs. A lot of them just took new jobs and they have pay increases and they're using that money. So how do you stop that? It's, outside of bringing maybe the entire economy to a collapse, there's really very little you can do. And I just think the fundamentals are still so strong. We do see orders, factory orders still in really high levels, even if they're going down. People talk about the housing market weakening, but you have to understand supply is still historically low. Like, there's a lot of things that I think people are just feeling, well, this should happen, right? The Fed did this, so this should happen next. But this is unprecedented times.
Ron, before we get to our final thoughts, I like to ask this question. So we're moving into 2023 here. As a leader, as a business owner, are you optimistic about 2023? Are you kind of pessimistic, or are you cautious moving into 2023? Rucha, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to Ron. What do you think?
I'd say cautious, but leaning towards optimistic. I mean, I think, it depends, again, what side you're looking at this from, right? I mean, the labor market staying strong is generally good for people, right? You businesses want people to keep spending money. Wage growth has slowed a little bit, so not as worried about that. So yeah, I think I'm feeling okay about things. Everyone is, definitely waiting for this, recession that is supposed to come. We aren't seeing signs of it yet. GDP was still fairly reasonable at the end of last year. So I think I'm feeling okay.
Ron, how about you? You optimistic?
Yeah. I think we have to think of, once again, let's put this in historical perspective. If I'm in the finance industry, no, I'm not optimistic. We saw that they kind of struggled today in this report. Banking, you're not getting out loans if the Fed is messing with certain things with the interest rate. That hurts certain segments of the economy. If you're coming from the manufacturing side and you just came off of this cycle of the most insane amount of orders that you've ever seen in history, I mean, you see new orders for consumer goods were just in the stratosphere all last year. If those things start to correct downward somewhat, people, I think, have a tendency to go, well, this is bad. It's a recession, or we're going backwards. But you have to understand, we over accelerated to such a great degree that going back to somewhat normal is still quite fantastic. Like, I think this concept of going way below where we were, I don't know if that's really on the table. And I think that's what people have kind of burned in their minds. I made a statement before this release this week about, you see a lot of CEOs expressing pessimism, but in their own individual actions, they don't seem to be doing any of those actions. It's more they see everybody, they think everybody else is kind of feeling that. So I would say I'm cautious. I don't really think I'm optimistic or pessimistic. I'm kind of neutral. We'll see if the bad news itself causes somewhat of a correction in this economy.
Well, I'm going to get to your final thoughts. As you're sharing your final thoughts, just give some insight on this. The Dow's up 300 points right now. I want to know, are you shocked by this or not? So, Rucha, I'll start with you. What are your final thoughts? And if I can get a response on that.
I'm a little bit surprised just because after the ADP report came out yesterday with almost the exact same number, everything fell. So this needs to be sort of a report with the same information but a different reaction. I say we give it to the end of the day to see what happens with the stocks. Sort of final thoughts overall is, I think everyone's talking about, right, like the Fed trying to sort of break the labor market. I think it's important to keep in mind that's not actually the goal, right? I mean, if it were to actually break the labor market, that would be very bad for just about everyone. So what we're trying to do is temper things down. And I think, it's going to be a slower process, take more time than maybe anyone thought. And that's, as Ron was saying, for sort of the, very historical time we're in terms of labor tightness.
Ron, how about you? Final thoughts, and are you shocked by the Dow up right now from the report?
I'm very interested. Rucha's point is outstanding. You got to be really careful when you look at the Dow. That thing goes up and down. Sometimes it's just mass hysteria, or sometimes, everybody kind of moves together. I think what's going to be an interesting thing is, do people in the investment circles, do people who are watching this from afar start to say, hey, maybe we are in unprecedented times. Maybe they really can't control it. Maybe we have to look at other fundamentals of the economy versus just the actions of the Fed. And this could be an interesting thing to watch unfold as this year goes on. What happens if people start to say, well, it doesn't look like, maybe the Fed doesn't have that amount of power. What does that mean then? Does that necessarily mean we have to go down? So that could change sentiment in and of itself. But I'm very, very cautious around that. I would say this, as far as, my final thoughts. We kept talking about these layoffs. It's amazing how negativity, especially around some high profile layoffs, kind of pervaded everybody's mindset in December. And yet, if you look at the number of people in this report who say, I am unemployed because of a permanent layoff, that number went down. Okay. So we have to always be careful about, some of these high profile things, and always make sure we're focusing in on these data points. Get really good at breaking these reports down, study this data, and you'd find out that right now, if to the blind person who just came in and just saw these numbers and didn't know anything else and hadn't watched the news, they would look at this report and go, this is an outstanding report. So I think we have to, constantly take these things and put them in the context of where we've been sitting historically.
We are up for an interesting 2023. So I'm looking forward to these conversations continuing every month. Ron, Rucha, thank you so much for your insights and your analysis. For more information about this report or any of our other reports, please visit lightcast.io. From the Lightcast studios, I'm your host, Christopher Laney. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next month.